I, Janet Veracruz, Vice President of the Duncanville ISD Board of Trustees, call this meeting of the Duncanville Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of Board of Trustees is present, that the meeting has begun duly called, and that the notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. Good evening, everyone. Our mission at Duncanville ISD is to engage, equip, and empower all scholars to achieve their unique potential. Since we do not have any closed session business, we will now move to open ceremonies. If you would bow your heads for me, and we'll just open with a small prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this meeting. Bless all that are in attendance. We pray for wisdom, and we pray, Father God, that the flow of discussion goes smoothly. Father God, we pray for the board, the team members, the leaders, and the staff, and the educators and students. Bless us all in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Now we'll have Phil McNeely leading us in the pledge. We'll have Dr. Smith open up. And now I'll have Dr. Smith open up the ceremonies.
All right. Thank you, Madam Vice President. Good evening again to board members and those that are here in attendance. Tonight is first budget workshop in our budget season. And we have a lot of information that we're going to be sharing tonight with our board. Obviously, our board has some very tough decisions to make as we work our way through the budget process. And this is really the first phase to be able to present a lot of essential information so that the board can understand some of the different nuances associated with the budget, and then ultimately make a decision on what our budget will be. Obviously, tonight is not meant to make a decision. Get a lot of information. You have time to process that information, ask questions, and then give me direction so that I can get our team working in a way that accomplishes what you want us to accomplish. So as we go into the budget process, you can go ahead and advance to the next slide if you would, please. As we go into the budget process, there are four main areas that we focused on and that we want to accomplish as it relates to the budget priorities. One would be to align the budget with the strategic plan. The second would be to establish a competitive salary structure. The third would be to maintain a healthy fund balance. And then the fourth would be to ensure financial stability for the future in our district. So as we go into the budget planning process, those four major areas really drive all of our decisions. It's not a situation where we're just kind of grabbing loosely for information or data. We have a direction and we have a focus. So you can advance it to the next slide, please. So as we think about that first slide there, we have our strategic plan. That strategic plan outlines our district priorities. It also outlines the needs that, as a district, we have determined. Those five major areas there all have objectives and target areas that we've defined that are essential and important for us. And of course, our resources, our financial resources, we want to align our financial resources with our district strategic plan and with our priorities. The next area there we talk about, you can go ahead and advance the slide, please, which is maintaining a healthy fund balance. This is so critical for us as we have as we start our budget process. When you think about the fund balance and the whole purpose, you think about having cash flow to cover several months of operating procedures should any kind of event occur of an emergency nature that maybe we weren't planning for. And so when you think about where we were back in the fall of 2019, none of us knew anything about a pandemic. We didn't know anything about a COVID-19 or anything like that. Well, we were able to survive through that, through the last 2.5 years. And we were able to use our fund balance because we were in such a healthy position to do so many things to take care of our business and to provide for students and to provide for employees, even during times when we were shut down. I mean, we never thought, obviously none of us never thought that school would actually shut down, but that is our reality. That's what happened. But part of the budget process is to be able to maintain a healthy fund balance because you never know what may occur. And of course, we are in a solid position here in Duncanville ISD, and we've been able to take care of several one-time purchases, of course, cover ourselves during emergencies. And TEA has a recommendation of 3 months of operating funds for districts. It's kind of like the baseline standard. Well, we're at 6.5 months. And so that is, you don't get there by accident. That's some real intentional planning and some strategic thinking and understanding school finance so that we can still get our needs met, but at the same time maintain a healthy fund balance. The next couple of slides really just kind of highlight for the board and those that are in attendance and those that are viewing online, just highlights, again, just the healthy nature of our fund balance. This particular slide just really highlights the fact that when you look at where we are relative to other school districts, obviously we have the districts numbered here. We don't have their name, and that's on purpose. We don't want to, of course, make light of any other district situation. So internally, we obviously know who these districts are, but it just wasn't wise for us to put the names up there. But at any rate, when you look at our fund balance, you look at the percent of our budget, and of course, the higher the number, the better. You look at the percent of our budget from an expenditure standpoint that makes up our fund balance, and you look at where we are relative to our peers right around us, we're 2 times or so in a much stronger position. And that is a good place to be, especially in light of our past 2.5 years, but we still don't really know if we're really out of this. So it's good to know that we have a reserve to help us if we find ourselves in another crunch and another pinch. The next slide also really highlights what I've already stated, gives you an idea of where some of our competitive districts and market districts, where they are in terms of the month that they have allocated for operating procedures in their fund balance. Of course, we're at 6.5 months, and you see the other districts. Again, we know internally who they are. But we intentionally did not list those districts. But you see where they are and where we are, and that's really the whole purpose, just to really highlight for you all and for those that are in attendance what we've done with our fund balance. The next slide, in terms of competitive salary structure. That's another focus for us as we begin the budget process. We're asking ourselves, how can we become more competitive? But it's also important to really reflect on all that the board has done in the past. And so this is not, of course, a complete list of everything that you've done, but as a board, you've been very responsive to the needs of our staff, our employees, every employee group in the district. And you've done that not just in word, but you've done that in deed. And so it is important to highlight some of the things that you've done to help us try to maintain a competitive nature. And so we've increased our beginning teacher pay from $50,000 to $53,000. That was a big decision by this board. We increased our teacher pay on an average of pretty much close to 7%. I mean, that's huge in terms of what that means for our teachers. We've paid $4,500 in supplements for employees over the last year. We've increased stipends for those hard to find areas. Some of our stipends are some of the highest in the area. And so that that's a good thing for us and a good position for us to be in. And then this last one, we know the challenge of insurance and how the costs are skyrocketing. But every year, our board has always done a good job of understanding the challenge that is for, our employees, and you've matched the insurance cost. And so it's been what's really amazing when you think about what you've done over the last several years. That last slide there really speaks volumes. You got a total contribution of almost $4,000 a year that this board has made a part of the budget, contributing to the insurance of our employees. And then get this, that's almost $1,300 more than what the state requires. So that's not a small thing. I could go on and on of all the things you've done, but this is just to highlight some of the things that you've done in the past. Sometimes, as we're moving through and handling what's in front of us, we sometimes forget about all that we've done in the past to help us be in somewhat of a more competitive situation. And so wanted to highlight that for the board. Next slide, if you would, please. The financial stability for the future, that's that other piece that we look at as we begin the budget process. We have a legislative session coming up next spring, so the 22-23 school year, and we really don't know what to expect there. So as we build a budget, it would be important for us to have some flexibility and some cushion in case we need it, because we know this is going to be a very difficult legislative session. To give you an idea of how quickly things change, just last week, we didn't know anything about what the governor just did the other day, which is he put a letter out. And the letter was basically communicating that he's giving districts in the state of Texas some relief. We do have in a slide coming up down the line that Dr. Bigby will share with you the impact that's going to have specific to Duncanville ISD, but just showing you how quickly things change and we don't have heads up. So it's so important for us to plan and think 2-3 steps ahead. I understand that the budget there's an emotional attachment to it. But, as your superintendent, I have to be focused. It's not that I don't have empathy and understand the emotional attachment. I just want to make sure that I do a good job in giving you the information you need and making a recommendation ultimately that's going to be in the best interest of the district and keep us moving forward. So we don't know what's going to happen coming up, and so we just want to plan for that. There have been several changes that Dr. Bigby will allude to in the special program weights. And basically all that really is speaking to is the way the funding system works. You have, bilingual, CTE, and other special programs, and the state allocates a certain amount of money that you have to place in those areas. And so as those weights change, we have to make funding changes to address that. And then House Bill 4545, that's coming back up again. We got a little relief on that because I think the state saw the challenges that it was going to take to implement. Obviously, all districts had already adopted their budget, and so this is a huge cost for districts to be able to find tutors and to fulfill the obligations and requirements of House Bill 4545. But I do believe that in the legislative session coming up, this is going to be back up at the forefront. And this time, I think they're going to be expecting us to actually implement. So we have to think about those things moving forward so that we can take care of ourselves and meet the objectives that we want to meet each budget year. I mentioned the hold harmless. I've asked Dr. Bigby to really dive into the details because I want you to see the financial impact that that's going to have on our district. So those are the 4 main areas that we are focused on when we start the budget process. And then as we work our way through, we try to stay really true so that the recommendations that we are bringing forward are all aligned with what we've deemed as our top priorities. Tonight, we have Keith McLemore, who's going to be coming up in just a little bit to review the TASB HR services audit. Board, everything that we're reviewing tonight, you have in your packet. That is obviously for you to keep and take notes and ask questions But we've conducted that audit because, again, we want to make sure that we bring you information where you feel comfortable with the decisions that you're making and you know the ramifications. I'm often asked, well, can we do this? Can we do that? Well, we can do anything, but there's always consequences for things that you do. So what we wanted to do is make sure we equipped you with as much information as knowledge as possible so that as you begin to make your decisions, you have a good feel for what the consequences of those decisions are. So Mr. McLemore is going to explain some of the details of the audit. Of course, we're here to answer any questions that you have for us. After Mr. McLemore, which, by the way, you do get an hour of credit for that, for the presentation, for board training. After Mr. McLemore, we're going to have Kathleen Brown come up, followed by Dr. Bigby, followed by Dr. Jordan, and then we're, again, going to take any questions that you have. I know this is going to be a lot of information. I know you're going to need time to process and think through, and so we have that built in, which is why we wanted to have the workshop now. So we've got still a couple of more months to be able to work through, and of course, I want feedback from you all so that I can focus the team on bringing back information. And if we don't have to, if we know what it is you want us to focus on, that would be most helpful for us so that we can target our efforts in that process. So I'm going to ask at this time for Mr. McLemore. How you doing, Mr. McLemore? I'm doing well. Thank you for being here this evening. We're going to go ahead and turn the meeting over to you.
Is the microphone working?
We got the sound going on the microphone.
Does that sound okay? Testing.
No, we need it. Need to get it going up a little bit.
Maybe I just need to get closer. How about that? I've been doing sound with the mouse for 2 years, so this is on Zoom meetings. Is that better?
A little better. If y'all can keep working to get it up, that'd be best.
Dr. Smith, trustees, thank you for having me out. This is a special day for me. It's been 2 years since I've been in front of actual people. I'm just loving this, seeing real people. I appreciate you having me out. My name is Keith McLemore, and I am a HR and compensation consultant with the Texas Association of School Boards, 6th year, and glad to be here tonight. Like Dr. Smith said, you get an hour of training credit, but there is a trade-off. I do have to talk about some compensation 101 stuff with you. There won't be a test at the end. It'll be pretty basic stuff, but that way you can get that board training credit. But it's also helpful to know why some of the decisions that we've made or recommendations are the way they are. And so I'll start off by covering some of those before we get to the other details. But after the compensation 101, we'll talk about the market comparisons, and we'll go first with teachers, then we'll move on to the exempt non-teaching staff, and then we'll move to the non-exempt groups after that, and we'll get into some details there. And at the end, we'll have the costs. So appreciate this. And I don't have a clicker, so if you don't mind, I guess I'll just say next slide. Perfect. Thank you. So how does this process work? We've worked with Duncanville before, and it's been 2 years at least, but y'all are doing a lot of things right. We met back in November and did the initial kickoff call where we talk with district leadership, find out what the challenges are, what the goals are, what you're looking to do for the next year, and we gather your data for your employees, your compensation plans, any other details like organizational charts are sent our way. And once we clean the data, which really gets going what happened in January, once the data gets cleaned, we start matching the data. We take your jobs and look at our survey we do, and we have about 150 jobs that we can match school district jobs to see what your market comparisons look like. And we'll talk about this more, but there are some jobs that we don't have data for. We get it from a third-party source. And we'll cover some of that. But that happened in January. February, I worked with your pay structures, realigned your midpoints to market, took a good look at your starting rates for your hourly jobs to be sure they're competitive because they move quickly. And then we came around and met and had a meeting with a draft meeting. And that basically got me the feedback I needed, and then I came back to where we are today with the final recommendations. So next slide, please. So let's talk about pay system objectives. I don't know if you can see on your screens there what I'm looking at here, but I'm assuming you can. So number one, recruit employees. Your pay system is a vital part of maintaining the competitive entry rates. I would say for teachers, it's really crucial. And then looking at your bus drivers, instructional aides, cafeteria custodial, where you have a lot of employees, multi-incumbent, in some cases, high turnover areas. Those competitive rates are very important, especially now. It's just we're kind of in an unprecedented shift with some of those the custodians, cafeterias, even secretary, admin assistants. Market's moving really quickly there right now. We'll talk about that later. You want to have competitive pay for your experience new hires. So when HR makes an offer to someone, they're going to find out their experience. And they're going to have a calculation to run to see where they would fit them in a pay grade. And so having market competitive pay grades is really key, because we try to get your midpoints of your pay grades as close to market as possible. And I'll show you more of that in a second. But by doing that, it brings up the entry rates. So it's important to have to do these kinds of studies, because it also helps for your professionals to have market competitive entry rates so you can place them competitively. You want to also retain your employees. Obviously, it sounds pretty easy to do, but not always. But in compensation world, you want to advance pay to market rates. And what that means is move people through these pay ranges. And hopefully, if you're doing it right, they'll never get to the top of the pay range. They shouldn't max out, because their pay is slowly outpacing how fast those the midpoints are moving in the pay ranges. And we have a graphic that shows that later. You want to pay for job value, and that doesn't mean just pay the market rate. It means you also want to control overpaying for job value and underpaying, and that's where any employer can get into trouble if they're overpaying and underpaying jobs. It kind of creates a perfect storm for overpaying and not getting the top talent that you're looking for. And finally, on this slide, you can see control costs. That means that you basically, your salary planning increases are driven by the budget. In years where you can't do a budget increase, and you probably shouldn't do pay raises. And so just, like with the hiring schedule, as a disclaimer on it for teachers, is that you can't predict future pay based on the schedule. Everything is in motion for that year, but things can be different the next year. Next slide, please. So here is the compensation 101 I promised you. What you're looking at here is just a hypothetical 4 pay grades. And just at the very basic level, you'll see the white line, dotted lines through there. That's the market range. And so the juggling act we do, or any compensation group would do, is you're going to try to, whatever jobs you have in a particular pay grade, you're going to find market value. And the average of those market values for the jobs in a pay grade is what you end up setting the midpoint at, give or take a few percentage points. And, we can't go crazy if you're too far behind, and we try not to go too strong, but within 2% of market is where we like to be. And so that market range is really what drives the majority of the math that I do behind the scenes. And you can see we talk about the maximum rates. That theoretically should be the maximum pay for the job value. And then you have the minimum rates, which is the lowest pay for the job value. And so the ranges themselves, if, generally speaking, you want to have the minimum should be about 18% below the midpoint, and same with the maximum. And there's a lot of things that go into play there that just depend on the different situations in different districts. But I just want to kind of show you that. And the other key thing to keep in mind is, and I got 2 examples of where this is an issue now, is that you might notice that the one grade is slightly higher than the other. You want to have the midpoint to be at least 6% higher than each other. So pay grade 2 needs to be at least 6% higher than pay grade 1, etc. Otherwise, you create what's called compression. And you kind of disincentivize folks from maybe becoming a supervisor or a lead, or moving into that next pay grade if they can do, I don't want to say less work, but less complex work and make about the same amount of money. And so what we saw after House Bill 3, this is with, I'm going back to teachers, but there's a lot of compression still from House Bill 3 raising the teacher rates across the state. And the result was like a 7.5% increase, which was great for teachers. But guess what? The teacher career path jobs, like your counselors and assistant principals, their pay is still trying to catch up. And when you see the costs that we have here, there's 2 things going on where, every district I work with just about is still having to try to catch up. But the differences in those pay ranges, because they need to be at least 6%, it can be kind of tough to do what we want to do. The other place we're seeing that now is in custodial and cafeteria workers. That market's moving really quickly. But guess what? When that's you're getting compressed, and you're kind of limited by how much the supervisors are making and the managers above them. So there's some compression there. That's just really normal right now. And if you have questions about that, I'll be happy to answer later. Next slide, please. And this is a more in-depth kind of a look at these pay grades, these hypothetical pay grades. So you'll see where those targets are in the middle. And the idea is to pay folks, your employees, as close to possible, on average around that midpoint. You don't want to see a lot of over the maximum, definitely don't want to see under the minimum. But the districts that have really good control over their pay tend to have more jobs within about 10 to 15% of the market values. And so I already touched on those targets. That's the average. Think of that as just the average of the market value for the jobs in those pay grades. And so that's also how we build the, we also value hierarchy. There are some jobs that have higher value in tech and IT, for instance, but we can't place them higher than the person that's supervising them, even though their job might be worth more in that moment. So there's always a fine balance going on there. Next slide, please. All right, strategies for pay system control. Assess the job value accurately. We have a saying at where I work that I was taught day one: when in doubt, throw it out. So, if we don't feel like a match is really strong, we know what a mechanic is doing, a diesel mechanic, we know what a teacher is doing. There's some jobs that are really obvious, but we don't have market data for everything. And every employer has some jobs that just, it might be a mixture of things. But you want to be sure you're assessing the jobs accurately. And so we do that when we do these studies for the jobs that we match. And we try to match between 80 and 85% of your jobs as a general rule of thumb. You want to keep your pay ranges competitive. That makes sense. But your strategy really drives, your district's goals drive what you're going to do. And you're going to, some districts are okay lagging market, and they have other things going on. Maybe their health care is real, the monthly health dollars that are being given to employees is really strong. Maybe the stipends are really strong. And y'all kind of have that going on here. You'll see that y'all pay really competitive. And I did an extracurricular stipend study a couple of years ago. I remember it. But you'll see that the teacher stipend, add-on stipends are also strong to market. Even though you might see that some of the pay for those jobs is lower than you like it to be, it's a kind of you'll make up for it in some other areas with those stipends. But all that to say, your market, how you want to compete, some districts lag market because they have those other things going on that make it okay not to get all the way there. Others want to match market. Others want to lead the market, and those are kind of fewer and far between. But some districts, they're sitting on geological resources and have other things going on, and they can kind of, spend to their heart's desire. Control pay spread between job incumbents. This is key, and it's driven by experience. The better experience data we can have, the more we can run our formulas to try to be sure that folks in especially the high turnover multi-incumbent jobs are spread out. And so you're not, if I have 5 years of experience, I'm hopefully not going to be making more than someone with 8 years, if at all possible. And we have these other placement scales, and they have been applied. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but basically it chops up the minimum and midpoint difference by 20 spaces and kind of spreads people out within them. And that's what how we help control the pay spread and try to create internal equity there. Also, accelerating employees to market pay. That took a while for me to figure out when I first got here, but it's like I say that the employee should never get to the top of the maximum of their pay grade, but they should always be slowly getting close over time, And finally, budget sufficiently for pay increases. If the dollars aren't there, you won't be able to do it, and that's pretty simple math. Next slide, please. All right, final one of these target pay grade slides here. So the market rate is intentionally set based on, like I mentioned, market value and district goals. The range parameters are set to limit employee pay variance from the target rate, and the goal is to pay employees near the target rate. Just to kind of summarize, the target rate is hopefully adjusted regularly. If y'all go a few years without working with us, the general rule of thumb to kind of keep it safe if you do give a budget increase, let's say it's a general pay increase, if it's 2%, move your midpoints half that. And that's a good way to make sure you're not moving your midpoints too fast. If you do a 4% increase, you move those midpoints up too. And we've talked about that internally with district leadership, but just a general rule of thumb. If you have, and you might see, and I get questions about this a lot, that's why I like this slide. It's okay if some individual jobs are, up to 120% of market, 20% above or 20% below. If you're new to a job and don't have any experience, the minimum is strategically set to account for that. So you can't have people coming in at 80 or possibly being up around 120%. But if you have large groups of one job type that are down that low or up that high, that's where it kind of raises our eyebrows and something to keep an eye on. But y'all have done a good job of keeping things in control, and the folks I work with do a really good job. Next slide, please. All right, that's it for the classroom stuff. Let's talk about the results. So the market districts you see here are somewhat dependent on, they are very much dependent on who participates on our survey. But just to kind of clarify some things, there are some asterisks there. If a district is geographically close to y'all and they didn't do our survey, I'd like to still get their hiring schedule for their teachers. And so that's why you see like DeSoto and Irving are in there. That's what those asterisks are mean. They're not in the other comparisons, but I am using their teacher hiring schedule to look at your hiring schedule. The single asterisk for the Arlingtons and Garlands of the world to control for, have an apples to apples comparison with director level and up jobs. That large district like that can skew the data a little bit, and so we'll prune that data out just for the director levels and up. But the data is included for all the other comparisons. Just a little explanation of what that's about. Next slide, please. We also, I mentioned, bring in non-school market data. So y'all are so close to a big urban area, it's important to keep an eye on what the private sector is paying. So for jobs like, I mentioned like an HVAC mechanic, a diesel mechanic, an LVN, licensed vocational nurse, speech language pathologist, we average the non-school data from this general area, the DFW area, with the school data that we have to be sure we're keeping one eye on that private sector. We're not going all the way to non-school market data or market value, but we're kind of cutting the difference, so we're bringing it in. But those two resources are Economic Research Institute and Comp Analyst. I point this out because I also often have folks say, oh, I found my market value on well, I don't want to name a website, but on some of those websites, you can go out and do your own research, right? Who hasn't, gotten curious? What do they make? What's my value? And you go on there, but those are self-reporting sites, and it's not geographically specific. So we definitely recommend folks not trust that data wholeheartedly. It's okay to use it as general rule of thumb, but this data comes directly from companies that work with the employers and not the employees, if that makes sense. So it's a little bit more solid and reliable in our opinion. Next slide, please. All right, just a little slide here to talk about your teacher experience. So out of the 766 teachers that were reported, this is basically a pie chart just showing average total experience in education. And, y'all on the average, y'all are a little below the state average of 12 years of total experience, but there's nothing extraordinary here. I get asked this sometimes, so I bring this slide. But the way you interpret, as you can see, the blue slice up at about 1 o'clock, those are your folks with 0 years of experience that were basically new to teaching. So y'all had about 8% of them this year. And everything else looks really well balanced. Most districts tell me they like to see a slide with, a lot of 1 to 10 years, because that means, you have a healthy group of folks still maturing in the profession. And so that's just the total experience. The next slide is capturing your new hires. So the data we had at the time, 153 teachers that had 0 years of experience coming in. This is a slide breakdown of what their total experience levels were. So nothing out of the ordinary there. You're close to a metro area, so I expect to see a bigger blue slice there. Next slide, please. All right, so let's get into your teachers. And the way this slide works is we look at your hiring schedule and compare it to all the peer districts' hiring schedules for their teachers. And so we come up with, you have these 5 benchmark years. There's 0, 5, 10, 15, and 20. And the idea is to say, okay, how far is my district away from the market value? So you can see Duncanville is down in the orange, and the starting rate is 53,000, and y'all are approaching market at years 0 and 5. But then you start getting a little bit further away at those higher levels of experience, 10, 15, and 20. And that's not totally uncommon to see because you're doing the majority of your hiring at, the 0 to 10 years, if you break that down. But if at all possible and there's dollars, we do dollars available, we recommend, getting all of these as close to market as possible, just as good practice. Next slide will show you the actual dollar values that are shown there. So Duncanville is at top, I guess really the second row. And then the local market medians are down below that. Then you have the percentage differences from market, which help to kind of, we all know about percentages. So you can see at 0 years, you're just 5% away from market 95, at 0 and 5, and then it trails off to 92% at year 20. Average salary is listed out to the far right. That's 92% of market. And then at the bottom, that's helpful for seeing the actual dollar value you can put on it. So, on average, y'all are about $2,500 below for that 0 year. And that's basically the way to think about it for all of these. Next slide, please. Let's look at the stipends I mentioned. Now, we didn't review your extracurricular stipends like coaching and whatnot. That's a separate study. We did not do that, but we do take a peek at your teacher add-ons. And these are like as you can see here, secondary math, secondary science, bilingual. So a teacher will get these dollars in addition to whatever they're making. And y'all are above market for all of these except for the general master's degree, which, and I'm going to say most, our opinion honestly is that because that's a master's degree in anything, it's probably not a big deal to be that far behind. We kind of are starting to recommend putting those dollars towards master's degrees for folks who are teaching in their subject area in math and science specifically. And we're not saying take away any dollars that you've already given folks that have these master's degrees, but some districts either are doing both or they're moving away from the general master's degree into a subject area. And the reason being is we have research that shows, that we've come across that shows improvement in student outcomes, like a correlation with student outcomes in secondary math and science if they have a master's degree and are teaching one of those two subjects. So just something to keep in mind. But look, y'all are 500 above at secondary math and secondary science, and 1,000 ahead in bilingual. So y'all are doing a good job there and in our good position. And that's like I mentioned before, it's a lot, I can't tell you how many times if districts are on the lower side with the pay, their stipends are really good, coaching and these, and that definitely fits DISD for sure. Next slide, please. Let's look at your non-teaching exempt jobs. So there are two pay structures that are set up for these exempt jobs that are non-teaching. Think of these as administrative professionals, accountants, principals, CFOs, etc. So I've broken these up into a few categories I just want to quickly explain. So you have central administration on the professional. That means they're on that structure. The management is the other type of structure. So that's how these are divided up. And you can see that the pay is healthy. And you can see in that second column, that's where that pay comparison is being represented. And the second to far right is your pay grade midpoint. And I like to draw a focus on that because something it's easy to get lost in translation is, hey, how are we doing with our pay? But if you don't have good structures and midpoints that are aligned to market, you're not going to be having strong offers for those new hires, and it could create retention issues because your pay increases won't be as high because the pay increases are based on, guess what, the midpoint. For non-teachers, the pay increase is going to be 2% of whatever midpoint you're in, whatever your pay grade midpoint is. So all of your midpoints there are really well positioned as well. They're all within 1% of market or better. So that you can tell y'all been working with us because your midpoints are aligned, and the district does a good job when we're not around keeping those in line. So just want to point that out. And the far right are where the number of benchmarks are, and that just means how many jobs were compared within each of these groups. Next slide. Here we are showing non-exempt market salary comparisons, and they are broken up into 3 subgroups. You have administrative support, instructional support, and auxiliary. And that's more from how I like to group these together, just because it's easier to talk about them. And so you can see the employee pay to market. Now you're a little lower here, you might notice, than you probably want to be. And it's a part of this is the fast moving market. And in 2 years, these rates are moving really quickly. And I'm working with some of the districts around here, and it's interesting seeing what everyone's strategies are, right? But you can see that your auxiliary is probably lower than you want it to be. It's 13% below market. And your instructional support is pretty close. It's approaching market, and your administrative support is probably a little lower than you want it to be. And to kind of give you an idea what jobs are in there, administrative support will be like your executive director, admin assistants, your accounting clerks, payroll clerks, those kind of jobs. Instructional support is pretty obvious. Your aides, special education aides, etc. And auxiliary are going to be bus drivers, cafeteria workers, in the food service department, etc. The pay grade midpoints to market, you can see, are all above market except for auxiliary, which once again, that shows that y'all are working to have competitive entry rates and the market level being market competitive, but the pay is lagging probably more than you would want it to there. The pay grade minimums to market is a new data point I didn't show you before. So I just wanted to show you that for admin support, you can see pretty much at market for your starting rates on average. Instructional support is approaching market, and auxiliary is on the lower side. Then you probably want to be at 92%. And the numbers of jobs that were compared, you can see there. Any questions on those? Any of those before I move to the next slide? Very good. So let's talk about the recommendations, and most of these are pretty generic. I was asked to put together a pretty aggressive set of models for Duncanville ISD. The teacher rates that were recommended were to model, in Model 1, it's a $56,000 starting rate, and then in Model 2 is a $57,000 teacher starting rate. And for all of your non-teacher groups, we are aligning your pay grades, if they aren't where they need to be, we're trying to get them to midpoint of we're trying to get your midpoint to the market values. Next slide, please. And so to kind of break down what this general pay increase, or GPI, is consisting of, for Model 1, it's the 3% increase based off a midpoint for all your non-teachers. So whatever pay grade you're in, you would get 3% of your midpoint. Everyone in the same pay grade gets the same amount. And the dollar figure comes up to $3,000 per teacher, which my math was correct. My brain driving up, it's about 5% roughly, as far as on market value, about 5% of the market value, versus everyone else would be getting about a 3 or 4%. And the Model 2, it's a 4% for all non-teachers based on midpoint, and $4,000 per teacher, which is about a 6.5% of market increase if you do the math on that. And so, okay, I mentioned this. So for the teacher structure, it's good to keep in mind the GPI is calculated as a percentage of market median salary. But in this case, I just represented it as the dollar figures, because honestly, it was just too much to put on there with 3% and then 5%, and et cetera. But for other pay groups, the GPI is calculated as a percentage of each employee's pay grade midpoint. Next slide, please. And so, along with the teacher rate, proposed increase amounts are going to come some extra costs. I mentioned earlier about the compression in the teacher career pathway. Every district's having to fight that just about. And the way the formula works, it says, okay, on a daily rate basis, it looks at who requires SPEC certification. So basically, a teacher left the classroom and became a counselor or a diagnostician or assistant principal. And on a daily rate basis, are they making at least as much as they would as a classroom teacher? And so that's basically the formula, the way it works. So I'm jumping ahead here, but bullet 3 is teacher pay equity adjustments, and you'll see that when we get to the cost, it's really high in your administrative professional group, because we're having to bring them up to match what the new proposed teacher rates would be, right? So that's kind of an item that I would say you have to do. But there might be some other things you could scale back on, but I wouldn't recommend scaling back on that. But you also need to bring folks to the minimum, and we really raised the auxiliary group especially, and the instructional support group. Those ranges needed to be moved up pretty aggressively with the starting rates. And so the cost to bring folks up to minimum, and we take them to a 1% above minimum to give a little bit of space between someone who's here and someone you bring in with the same experience at that zero experience level. But that's another added cost you'll see that is above. These are costs that are above and beyond just the general pay increase amounts, right? The targeted adjustments are where a formula says, okay, if this is meant to move people through their pay range if they are particularly low in their pay grade. And because the pay grade midpoint is now aligned with market, the idea is they're also low to market. So in any pay grade, and think of the non-teacher pay grades, they would get an additional 1% of midpoint on top of any other adjustments and pay increases if they are 85% of midpoint or less. I already talked about the teacher pay equity adjustments and the placement scale adjustments. These are reserved for the non-exempt jobs, especially it gets too expensive to do it for every pay grade, but we focus those on the instructional aides, bus drivers, cafeteria folks, and custodial staff. That helps with that internal equity. That's a piece where it's not a total experience-based scale. We still keep the range. It's still a pay grade, but we split it up into those 20 equal increments and spread people out to help with internal equity. So, if the costs are, if you're looking to shave off anything, the targeted adjustments might be an area you can look at. We can talk about it, or the placement scales we can tweak those a little bit. But for sure, the bring to the minimum and the teacher pay equity adjustments are very important to keep your pay system healthy. And I would definitely keep those. Recommendation 4, and this is a boilerplate kind of thing, and I know y'all do this, and y'all do a good job of this, but annually review the district compensation plan as needed and update to maintain market competitiveness. Specifically, look at your teacher schedule, compare, like I showed you earlier, to years 0, 5, 10, and 20. We have a data source that's free to our member districts. They can go on and if the capacity is there and someone can do that at the district, they could go and help out with that. But the idea, though, is, hopefully you can get as close to market value as possible. The other thing is here is to review the pay structures annually and adjust as needed. And I kind of gave you the tip there. Whatever the pay increase amount is, go about half of that with your midpoints, and you could be good without us for a few years, maybe 2 years. We like y'all. We want to come back. Next slide, please. Here are the costs. So you'll see this is broken down by the groups that we were talking about earlier. Except for now, I have administrative professional all grouped together, administrative management, and then you have the 3 non-exempt groups I mentioned there earlier. And so the general pay increase, you can see this is model 1. It's a 3%. Theoretically, it's being called a 3% model because everyone gets a 3% of midpoint pay increase. The teachers, it's stronger, but that's where those costs come from. And the bottom line, y'all are probably thinking about looking at is that 4.5%. Just for the general pay increases, it's a 4.5% budget impact. And then when you move over to the adjustments, that's a 0.7%. So this model ultimately would be a 5.2% budget impact. In the adjustments, without going into the weeds too much, you can see there are $154,000 for administrative professional. The quick math there, that looks like it's about a fourth or more of the pay increase. And those are those teacher pay equity adjustments I talked about. It's just, with the hiring schedule getting so strong with the teachers, that cost goes up along with that, based on what I told you earlier about keeping that teacher career path equitable with the teaching job. You can see the really strong adjustment amounts for instructional support and especially auxiliary. That's because those are adjustment to minimum cost. Almost all of that, we have those more competitive entry rates. And guess what? We have to bring everybody up to at least 1% above that. And then the placement scales are spreading people out in those key pay grades. So not everyone in those pay grades is going to be getting 3% of midpoint. Some are going to be getting more if there's placement scale adjustments or the equity adjustments, the other equity adjustments I mentioned as well. So that's model 1, and model 2 is the 4%. And you can see the adjustment costs go down ever so slightly. It's at 6%, 0.6% rather. And that's because the pay increase is stronger. But the the overall budget impact here is 6.6%. I used to read all these numbers off, and I think I can just say those percentages and we're okay. But do you have any questions on the cost or anything I've shown so far? Hearing none. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Jackie Colton.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So the two models that we've seen will all bring up to well, it'll correct the minimum problem that we have.
It's not going to get you all the way there. It gets so expensive to get your minimums all the way to the market minimums in some of the grades that and I wrote these down because I figured I'd get asked about this. I don't have to be prepared. So, the bus driver minimum is lower than you probably could be. It's about $2 less than the market minimum there. If that's if these are adopted, right? The custodial minimum is above market by about 25% or 25 cents from the proposed minimum. And I meant to say aid. Sorry, that's aid market minimum. Yeah, the aid proposed minimum is about 25 cents or so higher than the market, but cafeteria and custodial minimums are about 25, 50 cents below the market. So, I mean, we could get you further there, but if those adjustment to minimum costs are going to go up in the placement costs, then it's just something to kind of keep an eye on. So, a really good question.
Yes, sir. Do you know what that figure is?
I would have to run the data on it. If y'all give me, a target, I could work. That's kind of better for me to work around. And if you say, hey, we can't go this much, and I can kind of see how close we can get with those rates. But I'm going to be honest, the cafeteria workers, custodial, and instructional aides, it's really going fast right now. I think it's, $14, $15 an hour is going to become a reality, even though the minimum wage isn't technically going to be moved up there. It's just kind of been the consciousness. And the unemployment rate is like super low right now, even though 22 months ago it was like the highest it had been since the Great Depression. It's been a wild ride. But yeah, so y'all been doing, obviously y'all have a lot of things going on right here because, based on the rates you saw, y'all are still attracting folks and bringing people in. But over the next year, the market in those areas is going to move really quickly.
I know currently there is a problem with retaining auxiliary as well as teachers. So, yeah. Where to prioritize. And I know, if I remember correctly, 2 years ago, the auxiliary was prioritized with a stronger pay increase, if I remember correctly, percentage-wise. So I know y'all have worked on that in the past. And it's just a fast-moving market. And, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie Colton. I had a question. Can you explain internal equity for everyone?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. So internal equity is the idea of, let me start off with external equity. How do our people compare to the market? And that's so, I showed you the market value. If the market value for a mechanic is $28 an hour and we're at 25, that's the external equity, like what are we paying versus the market? Internal is folks within the same job category, for instance, a police officer or a speech language pathologist. What does equity look like where, based on experience that's credited, how are they in relation to each other? And generally, the more experience you have, theoretically, it's not always the case, that the folks should be spread a little bit apart to account for that experience. So that's what that internal equity is. I talked about teacher equity, because that's kind of a third equity thing I throw out there, and that's where you're hoping folks aren't making less as an administrator, basically, than they would if they were still in the classroom on a daily rate basis, including a master's degree.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
No other questions?
Oh, you took it easy on me.
I don't want to sound stupid, but sometimes all these figures and then say this equity and that equity. what are we paying an hour, and what is your recommendation as to bring it to what? Just plain old dollar and cents.
Depends on the job type you're talking about. But didn't you get all our data? Yes, I don't have it available, but the idea is we have them in pay grades that is market based. The midpoint is based on the market values. And so the jobs within any pay grade, we're trying to get all of them up. Well, we're not going to get them all up to market value, but the idea is those midpoints are set with the market value, and depending on experience, there will be people, 18% below that, up to 18, 20% above. But as far as the target rate you're looking at, it depends on each job that you're looking at.
And I understand it seems so, just to say, the pay grade and midpoint market, I just wish we'd say, okay, we're paying these people this X amount an hour. What are we going to move them to? You're going to talk about that? I thought he did the study.
Just making it easy on me.
You didn't do the study?
I did. But yeah, there are a lot of moving parts with that. But you can tell me to do something, I can go see if I can make just about anything happen if the pockets are deep enough.
Well, good Lord, I could be driving a Cadillac too if I could afford it. That's okay.
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Go ahead.
Okay, good evening, Madam Vice President, Board of Trustees, Dr. Smith, and our audience. First, thank you to Mr. McLemore for working with us so diligently on the TASB study, the compensation study. We also have a staffing study going on with them at this time. So now we're going to look a little bit closer at Duncanville and pay very close attention to our auxiliary department and some of the pay grades that are in there. And so we'll go to that first slide is where I'd like to start. And so this visual, the districts that you all saw in the market group, I want to talk to you a little bit about how those districts were selected for us. That list that Mr. McLemore showed you that started with Arlington ISD on down, it included Arlington, Cedar Hill, DeSoto, Garland, Grand Prairie, Irving, Lancaster, Mansfield, Mesquite, Midlothian, Red Oak, and Waxahachie. The reason why we selected those districts in working with TASB HR Services is because those are the districts we are competing with on a day-to-day basis. You know how we sit, and so we're so close to so many districts, so it's very easy for our employees to share, just like our sub pool we share with a lot of these districts. So when you look at this particular slide, and we'll look at graphics like this for our teachers first and then move to our auxiliary departments, that blue line that is in the slide, it shows where we are in Duncanville ISD with our starting pay. So for all of these slides, the purposes is where our starting pay is. Any district that is to the left of that line, that is a district that is currently paying below us for this job. Any district to the right of that line shows a district that is paying above us at a starting pay scale. And so as you are looking at this data and deciding what the direction will be for Duncanville, I'm hopeful that this will help to answer some of those questions. So for our teachers, we are currently starting at $53,000 a year. And so that is for a teacher who has 0 years experience. They've just come into the profession. And so we are starting at $53,000. And you can see the highest paying district that is in our market group that we are looking at starts at $58,400. And so you can see the difference there. And when you're thinking about us being on the schedule that we're on, which is a hiring schedule, not a step schedule, then you can see that if someone left our district and they went to that other district, if they had no experience, what they would be making. As we go through the slides, though, we will talk about the things that have happened in Duncanville that help to bring us a little closer to the market when we look at what someone actually has taken home this year. Okay, next slide. So when we're looking at our bus drivers, because as Mr. McLemore shared with us, that's our area where we are not as close to market. So we were at 82% of the market when we looked at the study. And so on this year, we're very thankful. Our bus driver pay last year was not this close. And so our bus driver pay on this year moved to $17.72. You see that on that blue line. But people were having a hard time finding bus drivers. We know that. There was a hard time there's still a very difficult time finding bus drivers. And so the other thing that you allowed us to do, which we are very thankful of is that $1,500 sign-in bonus for our drivers that was also matched to all of our drivers who were already here in the district. So we start at $1,772. And you see the district that is to the left of us that is paying lower than us for a starting bus driver, and then the districts that are to the right. I will bring to your attention that several districts who are around us do not have their own transportation department. And so I've listed if they are contracting with someone else and what the starting pay for a driver is in those groups. In looking at what they pay for a sign-in bonus, there were sign-in bonuses ranging from $200 to $500, but the sign-in bonus for Duncanville ISD was very healthy with $1,500. Okay, next slide. If we're looking at our custodian pay, it starts at $10.25 an hour. And so in this slide, you can see the line where our line is, and that all districts that were in our study were to the right. I will pause here to say that at our last board meeting, just as a reminder to you of what we have coming up for our drivers, for our custodians and other auxiliary employees, we've gotten to a point at this year where we're thankful that you're allowing us to also match what we did for our drivers with that $1,500 sign-in bonus and that $1,500 payment for everyone else that is already currently here for those individuals that are in those other auxiliary areas. And so that's probably news to some of our people in the audience, but we're very excited about that. And in a later slide, we'll see what the impact for take home will be in comparison, comparing us to those other districts as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, food service it looks just like our custodial department. The starting pay is $10.25. The structure is the same. You can see a neighboring district who uses an outside provider for their nutrition services and the starting pay, and then those districts to the right and what they are currently paying, and then one that contracts that is to the right of us as well. Okay, next slide. And then our groundskeepers. Our groundskeepers start at $12.10 an hour currently. The districts to the left are paying lower than us at a starting rate for a groundskeeper. Those to the right, of course, are paying a higher amount. If we were not able to find the groundskeeper pay, that is still to be determined. We are looking at those other districts, but based on the information we had from the study, we were able to see where they are within the market. Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so if we're looking at that, I do want to spend some time here to talk about what an auxiliary employee in Duncanville has really taken home this year, because when you're looking at those other slides, it looks like, oh my goodness, we are so far away from the minimum pay. But a couple of things that you've done, the $2,500 one-time payment, we talked about in our last board meeting what that meant. When we're looking at a bus driver, for example, if we look at a bus driver and we looked at the starting pay, which is $17.72 an hour, and you add in that $1,500, and you add in that $2,500 one-time payment, actually what our bus drivers really earned this year, even though it wasn't spread out over all of their checks, what they actually took home this year would equate to $20.93. And that's with someone who had 0 years experience. You put that on that other slide where we have our drivers, and we've then become very competitive in the market, right? But we do know that is not how it works for any employee. What we bring home each month is what we live off of. And so although that is what they will actually take home, their month to month looks different because those payments happen at different times during the year. For our food service assistants, with the $2,500 one-time payment, plus the $1,500 that will be paid to our food service assistants and others that are in the nutrition department that fall into the category of those who are identified, that will also get that $1,500 over their next 4 checks. Their actual take home would no longer be $10.25 an hour. If you look at the number of days they work, the number of hours, divide that out, a 0-year experience would actually equate to $13.91. And that would be for our food service assistants as well as our custodians. And that makes us above the market in both of those slides. And then when you look at our groundskeepers in Duncanville start at $1,210. And when we add the $2,500 one-time payment and the $1,500 that all of our groundskeepers and others in the maintenance department will receive over their next 4 checks, that would be $1,402 per hour with 0 years experience. And so if you're looking at the numbers we have here, this is where we are with no experience. And so, of course, it goes up as employees have experience. And so the reason why we decided to change up how we paid that one-time payment and for this next payment of the sign-in bonus for new people for this school year and for those who are currently here, the reason that they will receive that $375 over 4 checks is because we know what's going on with as far as the gas prices going up, the food prices going up. Everyone is impacted. The more you make, the more you spend. And we know the strain that has put on our auxiliary employees and all employees in the district. And you have been very gracious in what you've done, continuing to pay our employees when our district closed, even for the bad weather days. And so we want them to see that over their next few checks as decisions are being made about what we will look like for next year. Okay, next slide. So when we look at this same information as it relates to a new teacher in Duncanville ISD, as you know, we start at $53,000 for 0 years experience. And so I don't have to read those, but we will just look at the 0, the 5, the 10, and the 15 years. When you add that one-time payment, you can see where that puts us in market for this current school year. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then finally, I do want to talk and spend a little bit of time on our initiatives and budget impact. It seems we're in the middle of 1 year, we're already planning for the next year. And that's one of the great things about Duncanville is that we don't wait till the last minute to start planning. And so I do want to bring to your attention as we make these decisions related to our employees who've worked so hard. Every employee in our district who've worked hard have worked hard, but our auxiliary employees have gone the extra mile. They've been short-staffed all year. They've been filling in the gap, working extra hours. We have instructional aides who are doing some custodial duties for us in the evening. But we also know, that our teachers are also working hard in the classroom, everyone in the district. And in the midst of those things, we are still thinking of new things that we need to do in Duncanville ISD to continue to help us progress forward. So one of those things is our JROTC, our Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps program. And so I want you to know the impact that will have, because there is a budget impact associated with that, and it has staffing implications as well. Currently, we're going to need to hire 2 additional staff members for JROTC. And as that program grows, which we hope it does, that would also have a budget impact. The next initiative that we know is on the forefront and coming, and thank you to Dr. Brown and his team, is the one-to-one technology devices for our students. That has been something that has been on the cusp of becoming a reality here in Duncanville ISD. But we know that as we add new devices in the district, it's going to take staff to be able to take care of those devices. Dr. Brown and I have spent a lot of time looking at the numbers. I know the state talks about a 1 to 350. You take one employee to 350 devices in the district. And we are far away from that. Most districts are far away from that. But when we add about, 14,000 new devices to Duncanville ISD, we want to make sure that we're able to take care of those devices. And so we'll be looking at staffing to be able to potentially support that if approved. And then our Teaching and Learning Center, which is absolutely beautiful. As you add square footage, we need more custodial support there and the receptions, all the things that will go to make that the quality building that we want it to be to support teaching and learning in the district. That will have staffing and budget implications. And then with everything that our staff has dealt with, we added the employee assistance program before. And we are looking at some other ideas of things to add for wellness. Even though our numbers are at 0 with COVID, the impact has been great. It has been real. And we want to make sure that our staff not only are taking care of our buildings, taking care of our kids, that they're also taking care of themselves. And so looking at some wellness components that would definitely have a budget impact. We've looked at lots of things, yoga, Zumba, a listeners thing where they have someone else that they can call and just talk to, because we're seeing a lot of that right now. So we want to make sure that we're taking care of them in that regard as well. And so I wanted to share those things just so that you know where our initiatives are going, the implications that may potentially have, but also see a visual of where our auxiliary and our teachers are falling currently as it relates to other districts. Okay? All right. Thank you. All right, and then the staff incentive highlights. I forgot I had one more slide. So just a recap, you'll probably see this in multiple ways. The one-time payment to all of our TRS eligible staff that were employed by September 1st of 2021, that was paid at that time. Also, the $1,500 sign-in bonus and matching stipend for our bus drivers, and we're very excited that now that's going to be for all of our auxiliary groups that were identified, and that will start, I think, April 15th. And then our increased stipends and sign-in bonuses for hard-to-fill areas, and those areas are listed there for you. That helped us tremendously this year. With the shortage, we were able to do some unthinkable things. The high school worked tirelessly trying to fill their position, and because those increased stipends and sign-in bonuses were there, we had individuals who chose to come to Duncanville ISD, and we're excited about that. Another staff incentive that has fared out very well for Duncanville, and we constantly talk about this as we are recruiting for the district, is that we offer free pre-K 3 and 4 to our staff members' children. And you don't know how well that goes over. When we were at a job fair last week talking about that, they were like, I'm bringing both of my kids to Duncanville ISD. So it was a great marketing tool. And one of the things I want you to know when we talk about the incentives, word of mouth is really how we do a lot of our recruiting still in Duncanville ISD. We do social media, all of those things, but word of mouth and the experience that people have in Duncanville ISD is what brings them to us. And so when you're able to bring your children to work with you, that makes a huge difference. And so we have that to offer. And then that increased district monthly contribution. When you look at total compensation and total package, and I think that number should say $333 for health insurance premium. When you look at total costs, and that was on I think one of the first slides that Dr. Smith shared with us, when you add that, and we're so far above, almost $1,300 above what the state says, that is another marketing and recruitment tool that is an incentive that we have to do even a more better job of selling to our staff members. So what happens is if an employee is choosing their benefits and that enrollment period comes up, what they see is what they are going to have to pay. Right? And so what we're going to be doing moving forward is showing them the same thing like we showed you tonight, is what that would mean, what you would pay if you were elsewhere, so that we're really showing people the impact that $333 a month has on their pay. So that brings us to the end of this portion of the presentation, and I will now turn it over to Dr. Bigby.
Good evening, Madam Vice President, Board of Trustees, Dr. Smith. Some of what I'll present to you tonight you've seen months and months because it hasn't changed a whole lot. Some of it will be new. Please stop me, throw something at me or whatever you need to if you have a question along the way. Okay, next slide. This is the budget timeline. We're down to one slide. We started with two. You can see the meeting on the 11th will discuss whatever progress happens between now and those 11 days. And then we'll receive our preliminary values, which work sometimes it doesn't work very well. And then we'll update you again on the May 16th meeting. And then the process starts to have the budget hearing at the June meeting. This doesn't preclude having any workshops along the way. If you choose to do that, then we can certainly do that. Okay, next slide. A quick review of where our money comes from. There's really three sources: local revenue, which you as taxpayers understand that part of the local revenue. This year, it's about 45% of our revenue, or $57 million. It comes from local taxes. If you remember, the state caps us at 2.5% gain. They do that by adjusting our tax rate. Your values of your home may go way above that, but our tax rate's adjusted to where you're only taxed on a 2.5% gain, which limits how much revenue we can also generate. And there's other local revenue, interest, which is very small, gate receipts and other rentals and those kind of things. State revenue, this year we budgeted $63 million or 50%. That's based on our average daily attendance all year long. And then the weighted average daily attendance, that's people that are in, or students that are in special programs, be it career and technology, bilingual, and those are given different weights. Therefore, they count a little more toward our funding. And then federal revenue, we budgeted $6 million this year, about 5%. There are other federal programs, but as far as what goes into the general fund, that's what we're talking about. And that's Medicaid reimbursement and some funds from the ESSER. I don't have to spell out ESSER anymore, do I? Okay, next slide. Dr. Smith and I were talking about tax base comparisons between us and our neighbors. The blue line on each one of these is residential tax base, and what I thought was a red line that turned into orange is business and industry based. So you can see in Duncanville, Cedar Hill, and DeSoto, we're very strong residential based, and you know that because there's not a lot of industry in our districts. Therefore, it's particularly in our funding of bonds, a pretty strong impact. If you look at Dallas, Grand Prairie, Irving, and Arlington, the others around us, they're just the opposite. They have a bigger business and industry tax base than they do a residential one. So the taxpayers in our district, homeowners, are bearing the bulk of our tax revenue, where some of the other districts it's done from business and industry. Okay, next slide. We talked about compensation. Dr. Smith wanted me to go through a quick history of where that came from in the last 5 years. In 17-18, beginning teacher went from $50,000 to $51,000. All the existing teachers got $1,500 raise, others at 3% of the bracket midpoint, and you increased the insurance by $10 a month, which is what kept up with that individual rate. In 18-19, there was a $1,000 supplement paid to all employees, and insurance increased by $16 a month. Next slide. 1920, beginning teacher went from 51 to 53. If you remember, this is when House Bill 3 came in, and we went through all that process of trying to determine where salaries were going to be. Existing teachers were increased by 2,200 to 2,300, depending on their longevity. If you remember, 0 to 6 years was 22, and 7 years and up was $2,300. Others got a 3% of the bracket midpoint. And once again, we increased the insurance by $11 a month. 2021, everyone was paid a $1,500 supplement. Stipends in hard-to-fill areas in summer school were increased, and insurance increased by $19 a month. Okay, next slide. This year, $2,500 supplement to all employees. Teacher pay scale was extended to 30 years, where it stopped earlier than that before. Stipends were increased once again in areas hard to find in transportation. Insurance increased by $32 a month. You see a trend here. And substitute pay was increased. The last 5 years total, the beginning teacher pay went from $50,000 to $53,000. Teacher pay increases averaged 6.8%. You've seen that. $4,500 was paid in supplements. Stipends were increased, and the insurance was increased by $88 a month, or $1,056 per year. And that's pretty substantial. I might warn you that they're changing the way that our rates will be set this year, and they're doing it by service center region. Before it was statewide, so they took everybody in West Texas was averaged in with everybody in the Metroplex, which actually kept the rates down. So now we're going to be based on Region 10 area, and we haven't seen those rates, but I would be shocked if they weren't pretty high. But that's because medical care in our area is much higher than it is in a lot of other areas in the state. We haven't seen those. They didn't ask us whether we'd like for them to change it that way or not. That's just what we were told. If we were going to stay with the state, then that was what was going to take place. We do have an option for the next couple of years if we want to move out of the state insurance, but I know those of us that didn't get into the state insurance when it was first offered jumped in as quick as we could because the rates outside, and you probably know this from your insurance, are just sky high. So we'll study that very carefully and look as we start getting those rates and see whether we need to try to self-insure or go out with another insurer. Probably a little more than you wanted to know right now, but just to forewarn you. Next slide, please. Attendance, we keep talking about ADA, average daily attendance, and how that impacts, which it totally impacts our state funding. 17-18 to 19-20, we averaged around 93% attendance. 2021, we went to 0 attendance toward the end of the year, and the state made up the differences in those years, plus some federal money helped to do that. 21 and 22, this year our ADA in the first semester, as we talked about before, was 88.8%. Second semester, it looks a little better than that, and hopefully will continue to. And 1% ADA is about $800,000 in state funding, which amounts to every day a student is absent, we lose $40. So you take that by 12,000 students, and it's about $7,200 in state funding we lose if a child is absent every day.
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
It's $40 a day that we lose when a student's absent. And if you multiply that by 180 days, it's about $7,200.
Thank you.
Next slide. I know this is exciting, real good news for you. I showed you this at the last board meeting. I've added a little bit to it. You can see these are each day with our average daily attendance. You can see that before spring break, they took a little early break. And the two low on the yellow ones in February were a cold day and then early release day. But other than that, other than the month of January where COVID was jumped back up after the break, we've steadily stayed around 90 or a little higher than 90. So our hope is that we'll continue to do this. I'll keep graphing it through the year and we can watch it as we go. But that's updated now. Okay, next slide. I've shown you this before, where we budgeted between taxes and state funding $112 million for this year. If the semester ended at the end of the first semester, would be $5.2 million less revenue than what we budgeted for. Next year, if we stayed at that same ADA, that's the 10,360, that's what we had in the first semester, then we'd be $3.3 million less than we had budgeted for this year. And if we get a 10% value increase, this is what I was talking about earlier about the 2.5% cap, we get no more money from the state. They just, basically, we pick up tax revenue and the state takes their money back. So, I won't go into that. Okay, next slide. I did some projecting of, okay, what if we don't just stay at that? And hopefully our average daily attendance will be better than that next year. The first two show what you saw on the other slide. The third one says, okay, if we get back to 90% ADA, then that'd be $2.3 million less than what we budgeted this year. And you can see 91%, 1.4. If we could get back to 93%, then we'd have a little more revenue than we had this year. I can't see us getting much above 93 since historically that's been the number where we'd hope to get to 93. I don't know that. Well, no one does. No one has a magic ball to look into and say, okay, we're going to get back to where we were. I think it's going to take a long time to do that. But that's a little better bad news than the bad news that I gave you earlier. Okay, next slide. Now, the hold harmless. All of you got something or you saw it in the paper and, that the governor came riding in on a white horse and was going to save us. And the way it was explained to us, and the commissioner had a call today, and it was explained the same way again, is they're going to take our average daily attendance for 1920 for the first 4-6 weeks and use that to apply to the first 4-6 weeks of this year, which I did the math, and what I thought it was going to be about 94% for that comparative number. I noticed they published ours today, and they said it was 94.06, so I think they probably missed it a little bit. But anyway, instead of having 10,251 for ADA, that'll jump our ADA up to 10,855, which is wonderful. We think, okay, for 4-6 weeks, we're going to get paid at that. Well, there was a movie a long time ago at a play where the governor did a little sidestep. Well, he's done a little sidestep in this too. So it's you would think you would average six-week periods to figure out what your average was for the year. Well, that's not the way this is going to work. They're going to take the first 4, cram them into one, and then they're going to take the 5th and 6th 6 weeks and use those. So the first 4 are going to count a third rather than counting 2/3. And then the last 2 6 weeks will count a third each. So the way I look, we'll gain about $1.7 million. If they did it the way it should have been done, we'd have gained a little over $3 million. So it looks good in an election year, but the way they're figuring their math, it helps. And, nobody's going to fuss because it did help us, but it's not quite as it appears. But right now we'll take anything we can get. But if they would just figure the average the way they should figure the average, we'd pick up a little more money. And that's subject to change. Maybe there'll be some, depends on how bad the governor thinks he may get beat in November. Okay, but that's the calculation as of today of the hold harmless that the governors, and they really can't, legally they can't do a hold harmless. What they're saying, they're adjusting the minutes. And what it amounts to is they said it's adjusting the minutes, but they've adjusted the attendance. But it's actually fairly easy to figure. But, it's not as good as we hoped, but it's better than what we had. Okay, next slide. Remember, I spent a long time explaining to you about the less than 93.7. We got to throw those days out, and we didn't get to count them against us. Next slide. And it showed you where we were going to save about $800,000. Well, forget it. They canceled all of that. So none of that counts because they put the hold harmless in. So that $800,000 we were going to pick up from there went away when they put this in. So we still gained, but they gaveth and taketh away at the same time. They are going to allow the 4th and 5th 6 weeks if you have a low attendance day because of weather or safety. Then you can count them. But if they just don't show up, and then we can't get a waiver for those days. Okay, next slide. Quickly again, remember we talked about counting enrollment and counting pre-K enrollment. That's still the same. Each pre-K kid, as far as funding, only counts half. So as we look at our total enrollment, and it's up, and thank goodness it is, for funding, it's not up quite as high as it looks like it is because a lot of our growth was in pre-K. And we want them there because when they're in kindergarten, they count a full. So we want to bring them up from pre-K right on into the other grades. Okay, next slide. Fund balances. Dr. Smith talked about this some. You can see where it's grown from 17-18 to 19-20. It didn't grow in 2021. Remember, that was the year that we kept paying everybody, even though we weren't here. The audit said $63 million. There's some deductions that are going to take place. If you remember, we financed half of the Teaching Learning Center out of fund balance, which is $4 million. And right now our revenue loss, which is what I showed you earlier, hopefully won't be at that $4 million, but hopefully that's the worst case scenario. So that's probably going to be somewhere around $55 million at the end of this year, which is still a very good fund balance. It's over 5.5 months. So don't panic or anything. It's just, that's what it's going to be. Comparative to most of the districts in the state, it's still excellent. $6 million of that is carryover from TRE funds that we just kept that in fund balance. Okay, next slide. You saw these earlier. I won't spend a lot of time on them. Instead of just putting total dollars for fund balance, I felt like it was a better comparison to take it fund balance as a percent of what the expenditure budget was, because some of the districts' fund balances might not be 12 or 13 million, when it still might be a pretty good percentage of their budget. So you can see everybody around us, and these are the districts that touch us. You can see where the fund balance, and their numbers were taken off in 1920 because, contrary to what the law says, they haven't posted their audits for 2021. So that was the only one I could compare all the years. Okay, next slide. Same slide you saw earlier for the months. This is based off of what we had in that year audit. You can see we're still in excellent shape as far as months. And it gets a little long in the in the summertime, we spend a lot of that money because there's no tax money coming in and there's no state funding. State funding starts back up in September. Their year ends in August, where our year ends in June. So there's nothing really happening in July and August. Okay, next slide. Dr. Smith covered these quickly. It's the things that I was a little concerned about. What's the state going to do? Program weights. I'll give you a good example for this. The state says and funds $7 million for special education. We spend 12. And that's just to maintain the program that we have. And we could actually spend more than that if we had the funds, but it costs that much to run a comprehensive special education program. So the state doesn't fund that at all. I mean, basically funding it at about 60%. 45-45, Lord knows what's going to happen with that. If the state will come up with a teacher raise package, it'd be nice if they would throw some money in. And I would like to see them be able to put something into legislation where they can cover the hold harmless in these pandemic situations without having to go through the governor and through the commissioner trying to figure out how they can actually keep districts afloat. And once again, as Dr. Smith said, we're fortunate because we could stay afloat through that time. Some of our fellow districts were really impacted by that, and they did the same thing we did. They wanted to keep their people working, and it's very costful. But I'd like to see the state clear that up a little bit. But I'd like a lot of things that don't ever take place. Might as well wish for them. I think that's the last slide I have. If you answer any questions you might have, we once again covered a lot of stuff. Try not to confuse you.
Yep, Madam Vice President, can I ask Dr. Bigby?
Dr. Smith has the floor.
Thank you. Dr. Bigby, kind of walk through some of the models that we have. So that model 1, which was 56,000 for teachers, which is estimated a total of $4.2+ million ongoing to the budget. Model 2, 57,000, with a 5.3 impact ongoing for the budget.
Yes, sir.
Go through a couple of what ifs and what the impact would be and what the board might need to think about if they chose to go in either of those directions.
Well, both in light of where we are with ADA particularly, both are very difficult to do with the funds that we have. As you can see in the demonstrations, we're a couple of $1 million in the hole revenue-wise. The only way that I can see to do that is to fund the increase out of ESSER funds, but that only lasts for 2 more years. So something will have to take place if we do that between now and 2 years. We'll either have to figure out a way to reduce expenditures or increase revenue, and revenue is very hard to increase. You can't do it with the tax rate. So either one's going to be a very substantial impact on where we are, and it's going to be difficult to bring you a balanced budget with either one of these scenarios without putting the federal money into it. Keep in mind that the 4.2s, that's without benefits. There's about 4.5% of benefits that go up when salaries go up. So add a couple of 100,000 more to that on each one. I don't know if that's a good answer, but I really don't have a good answer because it's not like we're sitting here saying, okay, we've got $3 million extra to deal with, and other than the federal money, we don't have any extra money to deal with. I know what you want to do, and I want you to do it, but I would.
Can you say that one more time?
Well,
the federal money.
If you look at our total general fund, we can't fund it out of the general fund. We'd have to take some of the ESSER money that we've got for the next 2 years and use that for the salary increases. At the end of those 2 years, we would have to be positioned to where our budget was reduced by that much to be whole at the end of that. Either reduce our expenditures or raise our revenue.
How much are we short?
Just depending on what our ADA comes up next year. Hopefully we would be just about flush without the raises if we got back to 93%. And that's without any salary increases. So the only way to really do it is to do it out of the federal.
Can you just give a ballpark on how much federal funds we'd have to use on Model 1 and Model 2?
Just about the amount that they've got down there. $4.5 million for Model 1. I don't have those in front of me.
It's
and about $200,000 for Model 2. Thank you.
For Model 2.
Is that one? God knows I've seen enough slides.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be about $4.4 million for Model 1, which is the 56,000 teacher, and about $5.5 million in the second model, which is 57,000 teacher. I know that's really not what you want to hear, but you pay me to.
No, but thank you for
that.
that.
The facts, so.
I thank you for the clarity on that.
And just the wild card for the board to really think about, that is so hard for us to be direct on, and that is attendance. We hope, now remember, attendance is the main driver that'll get that revenue up. We're hoping that our attendance is going to be where we would want it to be. But that's a big hope. We have to see how things go. We're working very hard. You're seeing the results of that. It is ticking up. But that is the wild card that is so hard for us as an administration to be able to say it is going to be this. And I know people want a number, but it's hard for us to give a number. So we're striving to get there. You're seeing the ADA again tick up. We're hoping they can get back to that 93%, but that's what makes this such a very tough decision.
What are you going to bring us a list of stuff we could cut to make up this $5 million or $4 million?
We can certainly do that. That's part of what. Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to have a list.
Absolutely. That's the purpose of tonight. We want to get this direction from the board.
And I understand about the ESSER, about it scares me to use federal funds that are not going to be around for 2 more years.
Right.
Yes, sir.
So, and I don't want to go another year without giving raises. So we need to have a list that will add up to this, at least this Model 2, to save that much money. So bring us a list.
We can do it.
Other feedback that we need, direction on.
Anything else?
Yes,
Jackie Colton? So, thank you very much for your detailed explanation of everything. You always thoroughly cover. I have comments that I'm not sure if it's Mrs. Brown or one of the others, but in looking at the pay comparisons, we're real low on everything just about that was presented. And so I have concerns, like looking at the custodial pay comparisons. We've got several districts, but the thing that's not clear is what their vacancy rates are. I can imagine, they're probably very high as well, which would mean that these numbers are not, good numbers as far as being able to attract, employees in these areas.
Yes, ma'am. So when you look at our starting pay, you are correct. Where we fall. However, yes, every district that you see on the screen is struggling. No one is 100% filled because there are not enough people. So what Mr. McLemore was talking about is that the unemployment rate is so low. It's because there are not people to take those jobs. So in one area, raising the pay, it may get you some. We have a district close by us that has raised their pay quite a bit. It's not even on this screen. We can only go off what is published, but actually they've raised their rate to a much higher rate than this using their ESSER funds. And they told us they were only able to fill a couple of positions. And so the market is just that way right now to try to find individuals. I hope I'm answering what you were asking.
Yes, ma'am. You're answering the question. So I guess, you know, and maybe Mr. McLemore could maybe be better at addressing the question. So what are the magic rates that we need to consider?
So one of the things of what I guess I should define first what Mr. McLemore's role is. Mm-hmm. So he looks at all of our information with his team, and he makes recommendations as far as a model is concerned. Once we as a district decide what model we are going forward with, then he's able to answer those more detailed questions about a magic number of a rate, because what comes out of the model that we adopt or some other model that was not shown becomes our pay scale. So where we have what our minimum, our midpoint, and our max is in each pay grade based on whatever model we choose. That's what drives that. So there's no number right now because we don't know what direction we're going as a district. And so once we know what our model will be, then from that comes, okay, for a custodian, if you adopt this model, your minimum will now be this amount. And so I know that's where we're trying to get to now, but we can't get there without knowing, you know, what we're working with and where we can go. So that's how those two pieces work hand in hand. The other thing to know is that minimum rate that we have when we're trying to see what our target rate is, it's based on what a raise is each year. And so where we're at the 1025, if we look at this slide, for example, that has been our starting pay for the last couple of years, but since there was no raise, because if we change that without giving internal employees a raise, then that's where that inequity comes in. We start hiring people above where our current employees are. Yeah,
I know we need to. We're always talking about raising this and raising that, so we can attract. We need to say we want to take care of what we got here.
Yes.
So that's what we need to say. We don't always need to. It looks like you just forget the people that are here when you say, I just want to attract. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have vacancies, period. That's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. And I would like to have the least number we can, but I also want to take care of the people that are here.
Absolutely. That's always, it's twofold.
Let's start referring to it instead of attracting. Let's take care.
Okay.
It just sounds better.
Okay. And it's definitely our goal to do both, to retain the employees that we currently have by taking care of them, and also to bring new people to the district. It's both. And so, yes, we definitely want to take care of those that we have, and that's where that increase comes in, right? And so when we give raises to those we have, it's based on the midpoint of our pay grade. So if you'll recall, Mr. McLemore shared about the midpoint is that everybody in a specific pay grade, when we take care of our employees here, they get their raise based on that midpoint. So whenever there's an increase, that's where that raise comes from. When there is no increase, then they stay where they are. So yes.
I'm glad and proud and thank the people that we have. Yes. Let's just make sure we're taking care of them.
Absolutely. Okay. Any other questions?
Any more questions? Jackie Colton, please. I have a general question. How does a one-time bonus or affect their retirement?
It does not. And we talk about that. Whenever we give those one-time payments, it happens at that moment, right? And so for every employee, as we're thinking about taking care of our employees, when we give the one-time payment, it takes care of them for that time when they get the payment. But when we're looking at our last 5 years to retire, it has no impact for our employees. And so that also contributes to the moving around because people who are close to that time to retire are trying to get those top years.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I want those one time. I know when I voted for them, I voted, in my mind, I thought of them being up and above what we're paying. So I don't really look at that we should be counting that in. What's their average? What's this average? That was above, and in my mind, that was to say thank you for being here. So let's take care of the rest of it. And not because those are all government funds anyway that we're not going to have in a year or two. So you understand what I mean? It was a thank you, not a we raised your salary. That's just the way I looked at it.
Any further comments? Thank you for that. All right, Dr. Jordan, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Vice President, Board of Trustees, and Dr. Smith. It is my pleasure to provide you an update on ESSER funds. So over the past few months, we have talked about the funding that we have received from Congress in regards to providing relief, helping us safely reopen our schools, and to mitigate the learning loss. I know you've seen this slide several times, but I just want to update you where we are. So for ESSER 1, which was designed to provide districts with funds for emergency relief, we received approximately $4.3 million. For ESSER 2, which is designed to help districts safely reopen schools with a focus on accelerating learning, we received approximately $11.7 million. And for ESSER 3, which was designed to help mitigate the learning loss, we received approximately $24.9 million. So first, we will look at ESSER 1 and ESSER 3 as a reminder. Those are the funds that were given to us first, so a little out of sequence, but ESSER 1 and ESSER 3 allocations, again, were designed to help us with emergency relief and safely reopening schools. But we dug a little deeper. We wanted to make sure that we were being intentional with those funds and we had a focus. So we were focused in on providing healthy students and healthy schools, addressing learning loss, providing our teachers with incentives that helped enhance the quality of instruction, and then accelerating our progress towards our 2026 strategic goals. We've talked about before that it's important for us to make sure that we are aligned with what we're already doing. We do not want to add more to anyone's plate. So by doing that, we focused on those four main areas: learning recovery and acceleration, healthy students, healthy schools, equitable access to learning and enrichment, and then talent investment. So when we look at our ESSER 1 and our ESSER 3 funds combined, we have been allocated approximately $29 million. As of today, we have 23% of those funds allocated for learning recovery and acceleration. That's using it for items such as NWEA map growth, which helps us really track our students' progress, where they are, where's the learning loss, where do we need to provide support. It also helps fund our interventions that we have for our students, professional development, materials, and resources. 20% of those funds allocated for healthy students, healthy schools. I remember this journey of ESSER. We talked a lot about educating the whole child. And so we would love to take our students and just put them in the classroom and teach them instruction. But it is so important for us to teach and focus on the whole student. So looking at their social and emotional well-being. So our healthy students, healthy schools focuses in on our SEL, our restorative practices, and then our HVAC updates. So we have 20% of our funds allocated for that. And then 12% of our funds we utilize to provide equitable access to learning and enrichment. All of our students come to us from very different backgrounds with various different needs. And so in order for us to level the playing field and ensure that every student has what they need, we provided wireless. We've talked about our one-to-one and the computers. We've also talked about adding additional supports through the SEL component. So SEL overlaps in many of these different areas. And then last but not least, we have 45% of those funds allocated towards talent investment. And so Mr. McNeely talking about making sure our staff knows that we appreciate them, we value them. None of us are in the trenches doing their job right now. The least we could do is to make sure that we provide them just with a little incentive to continue to be invested in our students. So ESSER 1 and ESSER 3 funds allocated, focused in on those 4 areas. Now looking at ESSER 2 funds. ESSER 1 and ESSER 3, when I think about those, we're talking about the learning loss, still living in that pandemic mindset. ESSER 2, again, is focused on safely reopening schools with a focus on accelerating learning. For me, that moves us towards the COVID climb. At some point, we have to move past being in the pandemic and having a positive outlook for Duncanville and for our students. So looking at our ESSER 2 funds, our focus is providing time for our students to learn. That's ensuring that we develop lifelong learners. That's providing enrichment opportunities, acceleration opportunities, opportunities for them to recover from wherever they are, and providing them with new experiences. Last month, we talked about our focus for our ESSER 2 funds and overcoming that COVID climb. We spent some time talking about that reimagined summer. So we know that our students come to us with so many different needs. We want them to be with us in Duncanville ISD. So we have to think about what does summer look like and what can we do to attract our students and build an engaging program for students to be here. So when we look at our ESSER 2 funding allocation, focused in on those areas, we still have about 50% focused on talent investment. That's the one-time payment. That's stipends to continue to support those teachers in critical need assignments, and then strategic school personnel to support instruction. 13% of the $11.7 million will go to help us reimagine summer. Make sure that we have hands-on engaging activities. Make sure our teachers who are tired, but they're still coming and supporting us in those summer programs are incentivized for that. And then making sure that we are using research-based instructional materials and resources. 25% of our ESSER 2 funds will be focused on high-quality instruction. Teachers are teaching. They are working hard. They show up and they give us their best every single day. The least we can do is make sure they have what they need in their hands to teach our students. And so we're focusing in on making sure that our curriculum is aligned. They won't have to go to teacher-paid teachers or outside resources to get what they need. We will provide comprehensive materials and support to them. And then also working to provide ongoing job-embedded coaching and professional development. It's one thing to go to a meeting and hear about a strategy and then go back to your campus where life is happening and be expected to use that strategy, than having someone who partners with you and walks alongside you while watching you struggle or have a concern in the classroom and just whisper in your ear, try this. Or right after you teach that class, that's your most challenging class and you feel like you can't do it anymore, having someone in your building saying, okay, come attend this session and we'll work through the problem and let's go try it again with your next class. So I'm very excited that we're offering that to our teachers. And then 12% of those funds will be used for resources, SEL, instructional resources. I know that Dr. Bigby and Dr. Smith talked a lot about attendance, making sure that we have our students here. We want students excited to go to school in Duncanville ISD. We want them to not want to miss school, so we do need to put some funds towards those measures. And then last but not least, providing intervention and enrichment supports. So students need help closing the gaps, or students need a little more push to stretch them to excel to the next level. So looking at our ESSER 1, 2, and 3 funds. ESSER 1 funds, the $4.3 million, we've utilized 100% of those funds for the 2021 school year. And we use those funds to invest in the one-time payments, the salaries. All of those funds went to personnel. Our ESSER 2 funds, $11.7 million, 100% of those funds have been allocated for the 2023-24 school year in the categories that I listed on the previous slide. And then our ESSER 3 funds, $24.9 million, have also been allocated for the 2022-23 and 23-24 school year. I will say this, for our ESSER 2 funds, we do have funds earmarked to reserve for talent investment, depending on where we are as we work through the school year and our budget. This is probably one of my favorite quotes, but it takes time to create excellence. If it could be done quickly, more people would do it. So I know I continue to come to you and I present to you where we are with ESSER. Some things are a repeat. Some things you're probably thinking, just get going with it, right? I believe that too. But we are really focused on quality over quantity and being very intentional with our funds. And so we are working to achieve that unstoppable excellence, and we will continue to do that. It's just taking a little time. I am happy to answer any questions or hear any comments that you have at this time.
I have a question from McNeely.
When you say talent investment, you talk, educate me now, is that the one-time payment if we want to do something?
So with talent investment, it's a one-stop shop. So it could be a one-time payment. It could be if you all decide on raises. It could be stipends. Many different areas can fall in that talent investment.
Well, don't spend it all, because I want to try to do something again this year. So
yes, sir.
Thank you for that.
Aside from the raises.
Yes, sir.
Seeing that there aren't any more questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Jackie Colton has a question. You have the floor.
So for ESSER 2, the fund, 100% of funds are allocated for 23-24?
Yes. So those funds fall in those categories, the pandemic support, whether we're using the Reimagine Summer, high quality instruction, and then the resources and support. Not spent, but allocated.
Okay, but not for the coming year, but for the year after.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Just somebody sum up now, where are we? So we'll know where we are. Are you going to bring us a list to cut?
Yep. So what's going to happen? I want feedback from the board, because we want to be focused with the work that we're going to do. My team and I, we're going to get to work.
Okay. When are we going to get
we're going right now. That's the whole.
Tomorrow?
No, I can't promise you that tomorrow. But, I want direction from you. Thank you for that. We're going to bring comprehensive lists back. We got some feedback from the Sculptor, so absolutely.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So
absolutely,
we're going to figure out how to do it.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
Right? Yes,
I agree.
Okay,
Ms. Sculptor, I do want direction. Okay.
So I just want to say we have a number of, staff here. And so we do appreciate everything that you all have done day in and day out. We realize that it's a sacrifice, but you're doing it to help the students. So we would just like to let you know that everything that you have done, we've seen and we care and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for what you're doing for our students, because if there was no you, then what would our students do? So, but I would like to clarify my comment related to being able to retain new employees as well as support the ones that we have here. I realize that where there are vacancies, teachers are having to cover classrooms, bus drivers are having to take extra routes, and kids are getting to school late. So it's very important to me that we're adequately staffed. We don't want to burn out the current staff that we have and overtire them. So it is a high priority that we take care of our current employees as well as ensure that we're able to attract and retain new employees.
Thank you, Jackie Colton.
I would just say that when you stop and think about it, we have to put forth the effort and do the things we value. And through many, many, many years of being involved in school districts, we find ways. It might be a cut here and a cut here and an unhappy smile here, but a bunch of big smiles somewhere else. But we will find a way. And with this attendance, can we use ESSER funds to get cool food and give money to kids for a perfect attendance? Or I mean, spend a little, get a little, but I think it's going to be easy. We've got lots of good things on the plate, and we're just going to have to prioritize. And that's going to be tough, but we will take care of what we value.
Yes, we will.
I received that direction, but I
know
it's not going to be easy. I'm sorry. I wish I could say otherwise, but as your superintendent, it is not going to be easy,
because we can do a 1, 2, 3 or A through Z or something, and it may be different among all of us. But we'll let you handle that.
Right.
We'll let you do the summary.
Yeah. At the outset, you may recall I said, we can do anything. There are just consequences to what we do. Yeah. So I just want you to know I'm going to do my due diligence.
I know you will.
But the decisions that we all have to make, there's just nothing easy about it. I mean, it is very difficult to try to do what we all want to do with the current circumstances that we're living in. It's really tough.
Well, I just think, I agree with what you just said, and I think it deserves another conversation and to look at what our options are and to start with, here are some suggestions, and we may not have to wait 2 years until the ESSER funds are gone for us to start making decisions about possibly eliminating some things now. So if we go in a particular direction, it can be like preventive maintenance. And I don't think there's an easy solution, and I don't think it's going to be easy, because as we try to move our district forward, we're going to lose some things. And so I think it's really important that we are realistic in our cuts. I think it's important that we consider the ramifications and not just think about what our desire is, whatever that is, if it's raises or if it's to keep a healthy fund balance, whatever that is. I think we have to really have some real conversations, some crucial conversations about the repercussions of the decisions that we're making, and really identify what our values are and what's going to happen if we choose Model A or Model B or Model C. And so I think a good place to start is where are some areas that we may cut, or what will happen if we use ESSER funds for this. So I think it just deserves some options and real conversations.
Thank you for the feedback.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, what's a crying shame? We know how good we've been with our reserve fund. I call that our savings account. Think about the other districts. I mean, they have a tougher road to hoe than we do. And Lord help us.
We're going to hold it, no worries.
Mr. McLemore.
I would just, as I was hearing Mr. McLemore giving compliments to the things that we had done, all I kept on thinking was, wow, this is not going to be easy. And it was just confirmed just now. It's going to take all of us to come together and to an agreement to choose what is best for our family here at DISD, Duncanville ISD. And just know that as I look out into the audience, I see your faces. I walked your campuses. I know what you're doing, and we're going to do the very best that we can do in making these decisions for the best of our family here. And so I just want to say thank you for being patient with us.
All right, so next steps. Thank you for the feedback. Remember, that is the purpose of this meeting, to have this discussion, to put it out there and give us direction. So now the team and I can go to work on the different points that you want us to go to work on. We're going to bring that back to you. We're going to show you what the pros and cons are. We're going to do our very best to give you the information you need to make a decision as we work our way to June. So that's what our next steps are. Unless you have any other feedback for me, I'll turn it back over. We got.
I would just like, with the information that you're bringing back, would you also bring your recommendations?
Oh, absolutely. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm going to make thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'm sorry, I forgot about that. I do bring a recommendation to the board.
Yes.
Now, obviously, it's my recommendation. The board they can say, we don't want that recommendation. We're going to do this. But the recommendation that I bring to you is going to be one that I think is going to be in the best interest of the district, looking at the future and keeping us in a good place so that we can move forward. But again, that's just, my recommendation. You may decide to do something different, and that is perfectly fine.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Smith.
So
thank you for coming to the meeting. Being that there are no further items to discuss, this meeting is adjourned.